Hello and welcome to the Point Forward podcast, Milwaukee Bucks chatter from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. My name is JR Radcliffe. I'm joined by Owczarski. He is in Oklahoma City getting ready to watch a very exciting Bucks game in which everybody is hurt. No one is playing as we record this on Monday night. I'm so glad you made the trip to Oklahoma City. As we know, Giannis and Chris are already out. I didn't even see the full report, but I'm assuming the whole lot of them if they're not gonna have those guys suit up, Jim.
Yeah, as we record this, JR, Damian Lillard and Brook Lopez were downgraded to questionable, excuse me. I think like Brook never wants to miss a game. I really don't know who would play center for them.
Yeah.
If he doesn't play, but it would also make sense to give him a breather. If there's any good news, JR, it's that Bobby Portis is doubtful to play. And to me, I guess people might wonder, well, how can he be doubtful with personal reasons? It's probably a matter of, is he going to be here, or he's here, but he hasn't played in 8 days. So no, he's not going to, like, he's on the bench. He'll suit up, but he's probably not going to play. So we'll see tonight when we get in, but that's good news, at least that Bobby Portis and his personal situation seems to be at least resolved enough for him to rejoin the team.
Yeah, we don't obviously know a ton of detail there, but something clearly very, very significant happening, that he's been away from the team for the majority of this West Coast road trip. The Bucks chances, we talked about the pendulum swings that this team takes us on. We were on an upswing last time we chatted, and this time it's quite the opposite. The Bucks have not they do not look good. And I think I would also downgrade their chances of advancing out of the first round of the playoffs quite a bit. Based on what I've seen in recent games. Now, this is the West Coast. They are without Portis, which might be the thing to talk about. You know, I think sometimes I oscillate between Bobby Portis not being better is the reason this team is kind of stuck in the mud. And then yet, like, when he's gone, it's like, oh my gosh, they absolutely cannot live without that extra big man, without Bobby Portis. You know, it feels like that is the central issue. But they're facing off with West Coast teams. Of course, they were at home against Memphis on Sunday night. That did not end well, and have found themselves in a losing funk. Will lose to Oklahoma City, barring a miracle. And then I guess you circle the wagons from there. They're still a top 5 team in the East. They're not far from a top 4 spot, despite how badly things have gone. But give me your overall grades for what this team has been doing lately. Is this something you just dismiss because it's still January, February, and this team knows what it's going to be in the postseason? How are you looking at this stretch?
Yeah, JR, this is tough because before this period, before they left for LA, right? They beat the Heat at home, feeling good, and my thought was, hey, they've got essentially 2 weeks on the road with the Memphis game wedged in there. And this OKC game, JR, honestly, I had chalk up to a loss regardless. Like the home road back-to-back is just a disaster in general, let alone home Memphis, road OKC, right? Like, so to me, it was, hey, 7 road games, go 5-2. Like if the Bucks are going to take this step, go 5-2 on this road trip. Well, before they even get to Los Angeles, Bobby Portis has to leave the team to deal with a family issue back in Arkansas. AJ Green out with a quad strain. And I'm sure on paper, JR, the starting 5 are there. Chris Middleton's there. But this team only plays like 8.5 players. And 2 of them are gone. And Bobby in particular, JR, like Brook Lopez played 40 minutes at the start of this trip in Los Angeles. That was not a great idea.
No.
Giannis played nearly 40 minutes. Then they go back-to-back Utah-Portland. And it got to the point where now Brook's playing 24-ish minutes because Brook is 37 years old. He still moves really well. He still can block shots. But he's not at a point where that guy should be playing 33 to 40 minutes. And then Giannis, JR, we asked him in Portland, hey, you haven't had Bobby for this trip. And this was just the 3rd game in. And as we're asking the question, he just starts like mock wincing and rubbing his ribs to show like Giannis can't play the 5. He doesn't want to play the 5 all that much in those lineups. This is a team with 3 bigs. It's been set up this way since Mike Budenholzer, since actually Portis was signed in 2020. And if one of them are out, this is a real strain. And yeah, and AJ Green, at this point, JR, you're talking about, one of the best 3-point shooters in the league and a perimeter defender and a guy who matters. And he was out. And then even he came back in San Antonio, played 15 minutes after missing a week and a half. So on one hand, this has been a bad stretch of basketball. Like, they had a fourth quarter lead against the Clippers. They lost it. They were blowing out the Jazz, and instead of finishing the job, they had to all play, 35 minutes to end it. And then Portland, San Antonio, Memphis now, they just haven't had their legs. And it's, it looks like February plus, a Brook and Giannis combination that are just kind of dead legged. And, I guess I'm not surprised. I know it's disappointing for Thunder fans, maybe, who this is their one chance to see Giannis, and that's not going to happen, right? But clearly they made a choice here to maybe try to recover for a few days, win in Charlotte, win in Atlanta, and just try to get this thing rolling again in a positive direction before the All-Star break.
Thunder fans are going to be fine. They got the best team in the Western Conference. They're having a nice year. they can afford a little.
People want to see Giannis, so I'm sure this was a premium ticket if you had to pay for it. Yeah.
No, I'm sure that's true. The Thunder are situated very nicely. It just feels like we've talked about it before, but it's such a tough needle to thread when you're only relying on that many guys, when you've got guys who are now gassed, over the course of this stretch. And I don't think there's anything they can do to adjust that, because if they make an impact trade with the trade deadline here coming up in just a couple days, it's going to come at the expense of one of those players. It's going to be because they traded Chris Middleton or Bobby Portis. I mean, you're not getting anything for Pat Connaughton straight up, so I don't know what they do here. I'm curious what you think their options are with the trade deadline. Jimmy Butler is still lingering out there at odds with the Heat. There's been no reporting to suggest that he has turned down the offer to play for the Bucks, which you cannot say about other teams. I believe even Golden State, Jimmy Butler has said no to. So
real quick, I don't think there's an offer to play for the Bucks.
No. I just mean he has expressed he would not want to go certain places. He has not said I would not like to go to Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I know that. But Jimmy Butler aside, I mean, is there realistically anything this team can do to lengthen to increase its depth, to just do anything around the fringes that's going to make this team more viable in the postseason?
Yeah, I mean, maybe, probably not. I mean, I think Zach LaVine in some sort of package probably made some sense. Like if LaVine and one of the bigs. I don't think Patrick Williams makes too much money now, but like a LaVine, Jalen Smith coming back for Chris and Bobby, where Pat is shipped off somewhere for, cap apron flexibility and whatnot. Like that probably would have been a lateral-ish move. Like LaVine is clearly a better player than Chris Middleton right now. But then you're talking about ingratiating someone who's brand new to be a third scorer when he's only ever been the number one scorer. And so Jalen Smith is a stretch big. I'm sure that probably could have worked out fine, but you don't really run offense through him like you do Bobby. So even your second unit would have been handled differently with no Chris so Zach's play. So that could have made some sense, JR, in terms of just if you wanted to spruce up the roster. But it probably would have been a lateral move in terms of actual impact on the year. I mean, history shows, JR, mid-season acquisitions of like star players rarely lead to that postseason success. It's always the continuity thing. It's always the next year. So I'm not saying I think the Bucks are interested and Zach LaVine for sure. But he's in Sacramento, so that's off the table. And what's funny, JR, is, the big trades that people thought were going to happen, beginning with Jimmy Butler, as you said, that hasn't happened yet. So you got this wild, I almost swore, some wild stuff going on in Dallas and LA. And then you get a wild card scenario in Sacramento where they fire the coach. They let De'Aaron Fox sort of take all of the heat for that, oddly and strangely. And then De'Aaron Fox says, wait a minute, I want out. So that wasn't on the table either, when trade season sort of started. So, there were two massive moves in the NBA, JR, but none that anyone expected, like days ago. So now in terms of Jimmy Butler, like, that's just the wildest thing. I mean, that's still he's dug himself such a hole in a lot of ways. And whether Phoenix wants him or not, Bradley Beal has a no trade clause, and he has it. And everything that's been literally said on the record by his agent, and then sort of behind the scenes, is Bradley moved his whole family, his kids, to Phoenix. They're all in school, and he's really not that interested in having this conversation yet. So anything can happen, I guess, between now and then. But in terms of the Bucks, I'm sure John Horst is always calling around. Maybe prices have changed because Luka Doncic only brought one draft pick back.
Incredible.
And so I don't know if that's like a going rate now, or if GMs are going to be like, that was dumb. No one's ever doing that. and saying, so that's a whole other thing that's maybe affecting some of this as GMs and whatnot try to recalibrate what picks are worth, what stars are worth, because that's definitely been shaken up here in the last couple of days.
Yeah, let's talk a little more about that crazy stuff happening out in happening in Dallas, happening in LA. When, like a lot of people, I woke up to that news and over the weekend and thought, I assumed it was a spoof account. Like, that's not a trade that anyone is going to make. That's not going to happen in the middle of the season. Just wild stuff. And one of the takeaways I had from it was, first of all, it's Western Conference. I don't think it really deeply impacts the Bucks in any tangible way. I also think it's so much of a one-off and such a rarity that it doesn't, do what you're talking about, where it's really going to have much of a ripple effect in terms of how the rest of the market shapes. But one of the things that struck me was, wow, Giannis really could be gone tomorrow, and I don't think that's going to happen. But if the world is crazy enough where Luka and Anthony Davis can switch teams one day at the start of February, I guess I can't rule out these crazy scenarios where someone comes with a really crazy can't say no offer for Giannis that involves multiple first round picks, that gets this team back in the black when it comes to future considerations. Because, Jim, the only reason that's even plausible to me, and it's not even really plausible, but the only reason you could even entertain it is this team is heading for the cliff, right? Like, they're almost certainly, unless everybody is tip top shape healthy, and that's not going to happen if they're not going to do much this postseason. And then I don't even know what the world looks like beyond that. So you could argue the time has come where they absolutely need to look beyond the Giannis Antetokounmpo era. That's super pessimistic and jumping way ahead of the curve. But suddenly now this trade, Doomer JR is back. Last week I was like, they're going to the Eastern Conference Finals. This week I'm like, they should trade Giannis. I am not saying that. I don't think they're going to do that. But suddenly the world exists where I could see that possibility. Is that in your mind too, or are you looking at the Luka trade as that is the craziest trade I've ever seen in my life? No one will try to replicate it. Forget that it exists, other than now Luka plays for the Los Angeles Lakers.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, JR, because, I mean, up until that trade, players like that at that age, particularly, are not traded. Like, LeBron James has never been traded in his career. Kevin Durant had not been traded until just a couple of years ago, Brooklyn to the Nets. He was never traded.
To the Suns, right? Brooklyn to the Suns.
James Harden was traded from OKC to Houston, but he was the sixth man back then. This was before James Harden helped revolutionize basketball, became an MVP. Russell Westbrook was not traded. while he was winning an MVP. Like, guys like that don't get traded until they're in their 30s on a decline. And that's like the history of this in the modern era. Whatever that line is. Obviously, I know Bucks fans remember Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and again, I think, heck, even the Bucks benefited from Oscar Robertson, right? So very early player empowerment back in the day. But in the modern times, you rock with those guys until the end. And sometimes it's just free agency, or, in the case of Harden to Brooklyn, he just decided to eat his way out of town. In the case of Westbrook to Houston, I forget where his stops, clearly on a decline, right? And it was like, okay, time to pivot. Like, the scenarios are so different from 25-year-old Luka Doncic. I feel like that's such an outlier, JR. Now, Giannis, of course, is asked about it after the game, and he effectively repeated the post-game interview that Kevin Durant gave, which was players and organizations are held to different standards. Players ask for trades, players leaving free agency, and they're vilified, and they're the worst, and they're selfish, whereas look at a team. Team can just trade anyone they want, and no one cares. Which is not, like, in the NBA, that's, like, not as true. Like, like
no, it did kind of happen to Damian Lillard. Him being here was a little bit against his will.
Yeah, but he asked for the trade. So,
well, that's true. Yes.
Like, like NBA's Kevin's kind of right, but like in the NBA, I would say of all the teams in the leagues, like the players really dictate more of what they want than the teams. And generally it's because the teams just hand out supermaxes like crazy. And then the players are like, I don't want to be here anymore. So I get it. And whatever. Like, so in terms of Giannis specifically, look, he's under contract for a couple more years. I think what's important for fans to know is Luka Doncic now, I think, lost over $100 million in this trade.
Incredible amount of money that they cannot pay him.
Yes, it is. I mean, this is not a little bit of a haircut. So not only is he ineligible for Supermax, Supermaxes are the cookie for hometown teams. That's why Giannis, in a lot of ways, is still here. He can sign the biggest contracts for the longest time for the most money. But once you are traded, before that, you lose that cookie's gone. And so not only did Luka now will make $100+ million less, he goes from a state with no state income tax to a state with the highest state income tax. Like, they really took money out of this dude's pocket with this trade. I'm just going to say I think Giannis will sign one more extension in Milwaukee, JR, because Giannis is not going to leave $100-something million on the table. Like, that's
right.
Just, like that, of all the things I would fall out of this chair. I mean, it was, yeah, like, it's just like he said in the press conference media day, I think 2 summers ago, when Dame was traded for, right? We asked about an extension because he was eligible. And he, at the time, said, no, like, I don't care about money. I care about a lot of effing money. And that's like he joked. It was like, haha, Giannis, but it was 100% serious. And the reason his mind changed, JR, was because it was pointed out to him that if he signed that shorter extension then, with the new rules of the under 38, he is now in line for 2 more supermaxes. Like, he can make $1 billion in salary over his last 3 contracts, like, if he's healthy enough. So, that's a long way to say, could he be moved? Sure. History, aside from Luka, shows that these teams do not move those guys until it is well past time. And a guy like Giannis, I really don't see, at this stage of his life, turning down hundreds of millions of dollars. It just doesn't seem feasible. And now you kind of started this, JR, with like, oh, the Bucks are headed for a cliff. That's not really true. I sat with Wes Edens, like the cap's going up 10%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but Brook Lopez will be a free agent. Bobby Portis is going to opt out. Pat Connaughton will be traded this summer. And Chris Middleton, while he is opting in, Chris is probably being traded this summer. Like, for the first time in a long time, JR, they're going to actually have real free agent dollars to work with to build around Dame and Giannis. So, yes and no. I think this year is important. They're trying to win. But I think the Luka thing is such a wild outlier in so many ways. And yeah, the Bucks, look, they are aging. We are seeing that. They're trying their best to manage it. But I do think in terms of the future, Giannis is going to be here for a little while yet. And how they rebuild it and reshuffle the cards, I think this summer will be really interesting if you're a Bucks fan.
So that leads me to one last question. When I look at this team, I see a team that's either going to lose in the first round of the playoffs, maybe a hard-fought series, or maybe they make it to the second round, but then lose there. If that is what indeed happens, I know a lot of people will view this season as a disappointment. What are the consequences of that beyond what you're just describing? Is they get a clean slate. They don't even really need to make any other moves because the players will churn over so much. You can make separate judgments if you want about Doc Rivers or the front office or whatever. But is it just going to be we're just going to change those players, or is there going to be more to it? Will it be seen as enough of a disappointment that the team will have to make changes somewhere else? And I don't know where those changes can or will be made, but what do you think about that?
You look, if they don't reach a conference final, or perhaps the standard is a final, right? With the moves that they've made, right? Only Wes Edens and Jimmy Haslam know what they consider their lowest bar.
Yeah.
But I think it's fair to say this is an important result. The result's important to John Horst. He's the last one left. He's hired and fired a couple coaches now. The team, when I asked Wes Edens at the start of the year, why did you deny John Horst the ability to interview in Detroit? And he said, well, we trusted John to get us here, put this team together. We want to see him through. But if you also notice, JR, there has not been a contract extension for general manager John Horst since that time. So if they win a title, if they go to the finals and lose, does John Horst get an extension after this? Maybe. I don't know. But that's the natural part there of, if this doesn't work, does ownership trust him enough to reset the roster around Dame and Giannis? That's a question only two people know the answer to, right? So I think that's on the table. It has to be looked at. But Wes was look, you always take things with a grain of salt because, again, things change, right? Like 1 week, Pat Riley says, we're not trading Jimmy Butler. And then like 8 days later, it's like, we're taking calls on Jimmy Butler. So you always have to have that caveat, which is not fun, but it is true that, I think if they win it all, JR, I think, asking Brook to come back on a 2-year deal for less money is legitimate. Having Chris play it out is legitimate, because think about it. If you're talking about a finals run, what does that mean? They're all healthy. They all played great, and it came together, right? So, like, that's the best scenario. Now, to your point of, look, you can't take away the last week, JR, because they did lose. They're going to lose tonight. It's a bad stretch. But from November 12th, at the end of the 2-8 start, through January 23rd, so you're talking about a real good sample size of games. They won the NBA Cup and dominated the Oklahoma City Thunder, blew them out of the gym in Vegas. They improved to, I think, the number 5 scoring defense in the league, like a top 8-9 rating. For those who like defensive rating as a true measure, they were a top 10 offense from November 12th through January 23rd. That's winning basketball in the playoffs, JR. Like, if you can, like, they somehow extricated that out of this team, and it seems easy to, like, not think about that to a degree. It may sound surprising to some folks. Like, they were that good defensively. And that was probably the biggest question, JR, right? Is like, could they stop anyone with this group? And they were. And then on the other side of it, they had a top 10 offense with Chris Middleton not playing well, and now he's playing well. And Chris is playing 22 minutes a game and has scored over 20 points in these last few, right? So I don't think I think there is a floor. I think you can say, wow, if they're the 5 seed and have to go to Orlando, is that great? No, we could. I would probably pick the Bucks in 7 games.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I would too.
If they rip off, look, they have won 7 in a row. We've seen them win 8 of 10, I think, on a couple different occasions. If they do another 6-game win streak and another 8 out of 10 somewhere, and they're the 4 seed, or New York gets hurt, and if they're the 3 seed, like, I could see them going to the Eastern Conference Final.
Okay.
So but right now though, JR, like, they are what they are. They're the 5 seed. They have an under 5 record on the road. 0-8 against the top 3 teams in the East. They have lost 8 games to lottery bound teams. So they are situated where they should be. But I think we've seen, again, November 12th to January 23rd is a long stretch of games. I think if you look at that and you say, wow, like, that's, if not the best they can be, it's pretty close. That's a team that could win a playoff series. So it's just they got to be able to recapture that once they're whole.
Someday, Jim Owczarski, I will bring you down to my level, and you will doomer with me. Instead, I leave this conversation feeling a little bit better than when I came into it. He is Jim Owczarski, Bucks beat reporter for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Find everything he has at JS Online. I actually took a look back at that Kareem trade 50 years ago this season in light of the Doncic Anthony Davis exchange. So you can take a look at that at jsonline.com as well. Thank you for listening to the Point Forward podcast. We'll be back in touch with you again very soon. Bye-bye.